Good evening, my friends. What a day. What a day. What a day. We uh we woke up here in Middleburg to 3 inches of snow. And I actually I have a big barn at my house, and last night when I ran out, supported a local restaurant and got some dinner, and on my way home a little chilly, and I thought, maybe I'll park it in the barn just in case, we get a little snow. Nah, if we get a little, no big deal. And then sure enough, I woke up this morning and I looked outside, and we have a two-story house, and I looked down onto the lawn, and it was white, and I couldn't quite believe it. But anywho, some good stuff, some good controversial stuff to talk about in the news tonight, and couple cool things about this day in history. But I'm really loving this book. So let's get into our book and see where things turn tonight. I hope that our family starts to see some happy times. Kind of seems like a roller coaster so far. One of the first consequences of the discovery of the Union. Oh, that's right. I'm sorry. Just a quick recap. So Yorgos has really fallen in love with the Union, and Marija has really kind of fallen in love with Thamos, right? And that's opened up some possibilities for the family and made things a little bit easier. And Yorgos, we kind of left off talking about Yorgos has kind of, thought about his whole life. He's gone to church, but church has never really done anything for him. But now, he goes to these union meetings where he doesn't really understand everything that's going on, but he's inspired. Excuse me. He's inspired by, what he sees and the passion he sees in people. All right. So one of the first consequences of the discovery of the Union was that Yorgos became desirous of learning English. Ah ha ha. He wanted to know what was going on in the meetings, and he wanted to be able to take part in him, so he began to look about him and try to pick up words. The children who were at school and learning fast would teach him a few, and a friend loaned him a little book that had some in it, and Ona would read them to him. Then Yorgos became sorry that he could not read himself, and later on in winter, when someone told him that there was a night school and that it was free, he went and he enrolled. After that, every evening that he got home from the yards in time, he would go to school. He would go even if there were only time for a half hour. There we go. They were teaching him both to read and speak in English, and they would have taught him other things only if he had a little more time. Also, the Union made another great difference with him. It made him begin to pay attention to the country. It was the beginning of democracy with him. It was a little state, the Union, a miniature republic. Its affairs were every man's affairs, and every man had a real say about them. In other words, in the Union, Yorgos learned to talk politics. In the place where he had come from, there had not been any politics. In Russia, one thought of the government as an affliction like the lightning and the hail. Duck, little brother, duck, the wise old peasants would whisper. Everything passes away. And when Yorgos had first come to America, he had supposed that it was the same. He had people say that it was a free country. But what did that really mean? He found out here, precisely as in Russia, there were rich men who owned everything. And if one could not find any work, one was hunger. One was not the hunger. And he began to feel the same sort of hunger. Hold on one second. My cat is ripping something apart. My cat grabbed my mask and was running around the house with it. Yes, I do have a mask. I have a spare one too. Okay, let me have a quick little drink. So when Yorgos had been working about 3 weeks at Brown's, there had come to him one noontime a man who was employed as a night watchman, and who asked him, excuse me, who was employed as a night watchman. I'm sorry, let me back up. When Yorgis had been working about 3 weeks at Brown's, there had come to him one noontime a man who was employed as a night watchman, and who asked him if he would not like to take a naturalization paper and become a citizen. Yorgis did not know what that meant, but the man explained the advantages. In the first place, it would not cost him anything, and it would get him a half day off, with his pay just the same. And then when election time came, he'd be able to vote. And there was something in that. Yorgis was not naturally glad to accept, and so the night watchman said a few words to the boss, and he was excused for the rest of the day. Later on, he wanted a holiday to get married. When he wanted a holiday to get married, and he could not get it, and it was for the holiday with pay just the same. What power had wrought the miracle, heaven only knew. However, he went with the man who picked up several other newly landed immigrants, Poles, Lithuanians, and Slovaks, and took them outside, where stood a great 4-horse tally-ho coach with 15 or 20 men already in it. It was a fine chance to see the sights of the city, and the party that was a merry time, with plenty of beer handed up from inside. So they drove downtown and stopped before an imposing granite building, in which they interviewed an official who had the papers all ready, with only the names to be filled out. So each man in turn took an oath, of which he had not understood a word, and then was presented to him a handsome ornamented document with a big red seal of the United States upon it. And he was told that he had become a citizen of the Republic of the United States and the equal of the president himself. A month or two later, Yorgis had another interview with the same man, who was told where he had to go register. Then finally, when election day came, the packing houses posted notice that men who desired to vote might remain away until 9 that morning. And the same night watchman took Yorgis and the rest of his flock into the back room of a saloon and showed each of them where and how to mark a ballot, then gave each $2 and took them to the polling place, where there was a policeman on duty, especially to see that they got through all right. Yorgis felt quite proud of this good luck till he got home and met Jonas, who had taken the leader aside and whispered to him, offering to vote 3 times for $4, which offer had been accepted. So somebody is saying, hey, fill out the ballot this way, and we'll give you $2. And they're doing it. And one guy did it a couple times for $4. And now in the Union, Yorgis met men who explained all the mystery to him. And he learned that America differed from Russia in that its government existed under the form of democracy. The officials who ruled it and got all the graft had to be elected first. And so there were 2 sets of grafters, known as political parties, and the one got the office which bought the most votes. Now and then the election was very close, and that was the time the poor man came in. In stockyards, this was only in national and state elections, for in local elections, the Democratic Party always carried everything. The ruler of the district was therefore the Democratic boss, a little Irishman named Mike Scully. Scully had an important party office in the state and bossed even the mayor of the city, it was said. It was his boast that he carried the stockyards in his pocket. He was an enormously rich man. He had a hand in all the business and all the big graft in the neighborhood. It was Scully, for instance, who owned the dump which Yorgis and Ona had seen on the first day of their arrival. Not only did he own the dump, but he owned the brick factory as well. He first took out the clay to make into the bricks. Then he had the city bring garbage to fill up the hole so that he could build houses to sell to people. Then, too, he sold the bricks to the city at his own price, and the city came and got them in all its own wagons. He also owned the other hole nearby where the stagnant water was, and it was he who cut the ice and sold it. And that was more if the men told truth. He had not had to pay any taxes for the water, and he had built the ice house out of city lumber and had not had to pay anything for that. The newspapers had got hold of that story, and there had been a scandal, but Scully hired somebody to confess and take all the blame, and then skip the country. It was said, too, that he had built his brick kiln in the same way. The workmen were on the city payroll while they did it. However, one had to press closely to get these things out of the men, for it was not their business, and Mike Scully was a good man to stand in with. A note signed by him was equal to a job any time in any of the packing houses. He also employed a good many men himself, and worked them only 8 hours a day, and paid them the highest wages. This gave him many friends, all of whom he had gotten together into the War Whoop League, whose clubhouse you might see just outside of the yards. It was the biggest clubhouse and the biggest club in all of Chicago. They had had prize fights every now and then, cockfights, and even dog fights. The policemen in the district all belonged to the league, and instead of suppressing the fights, they sold tickets for them. The men had taken Yorgis to be naturalized was one of these Indians, as they were called. On election day, there would be hundreds of them out, and with all the big wads of money in their pockets and free drinks at every saloon in the district. That was another thing, the men said. All the saloon keepers had to be Indians and to put up on demand. Otherwise, they could not do business on Sundays, nor have any gambling at all. In the same way, Scully had all the clubs and all the fire departments at his disposal, and all the rest of the city graft in the Stockyard district. He was building a block of flats somewhere up on Ashland Avenue, and the man who was overseeing it for him was drawing pay as a city inspector of sewers. The city inspector of water pipes had been dead and buried for a year, but somebody was still drawing his pay. The city inspector of sidewalks was a barkeeper at the War Whoop Cafe, and maybe he could make it uncomfortable for any tradesman who did not stand with Scully. Even the Packers were in awe of him, so the men said, and it gave them the pleasure to believe this, for Scully stood as the people's man and boasted of it boldly when election day came. The Packers had wanted a bridge at Ashland Avenue, but they had not been able to get it until they had seen Scully. And it was the same with Bubbly Creek, which the city had threatened to make the Packers cover over, till Scully had come into their aid. Bubbly Creek is the arm of the Chicago River. It forms the southern boundary of the yards. All the drainage of a square mile of packing houses empties into it, so that it was really a great open sewer, 100 or 2 feet wide. One long arm of it is blind, and the fill stays there for forever and a day. The grease and chemicals that are poured into it undergo all sorts of strange transformations, which all the cause of its name. It is constantly in motion. It is a huge fish, as if huge fish were feeding in it, or great leviathans disporting themselves in the depths. Bubbles of carbonic acid gas will rise to the surface and burst and make rings 2 or 3 feet wide. Here and there, the grease filth have caked solid, and the creek looks like a bed of lava. Chickens walk about on it, feeding, and many times an unwary stranger has started to stroll across and vanish temporarily. The Packers used to leave the creek that way, until every now and then the surface would catch on fire and burn furiously. The fire department would have to come and put it out. Once, however, an ingenious stranger came and started to gather this filth in scows and make lard out of it. Then the Packers took the cue and got out an injunction to stop him, and afterwards gathered it themselves. The banks of Bubbly Creek are plastered thick with hairs, and it was also the Packers, and this also the Packers gathered and cleaned. There were things even stranger than this, according to the gossip of the men. The Packers had secret mains through which they stole billions of gallons of the city's water. The newspapers had been full of this scandal. Once there had been an investigation and the actual uncovering of the pipes, but nobody had been punished and the thing went right on. Then there was the condemned meat industry, with its endless horrors The people of Chicago saw the government inspectors of Packingtown, and they took that to mean that they were protected from diseased meat. They did not understand that these 163 inspectors had been appointed at the request of the packers, and then that they were paid by the United States government to certify all the diseased meat was kept in the state. They had no authority beyond that for the inspection of meat to be sold in the city and state. The whole force in Packingtown consisted of 3 henchmen, local political machine. So the guys that are really doing a lot of these inspecting, they're a part of this corrupt system. Quote unquote, rules and regulations for the inspection of livestock and their products. United States Department of Agriculture, Bureau, excuse me, Bureau of Animal Industries, Order Number 125. Section 1. Proprietors of slaughterhouses, canning, salting, packing, or rendering establishment engaged in the slaughtering of cattle, sheep, or swine, or the packing of their products, the carcasses of products which are to become subjects of interstate or foreign commerce, shall make application to the Secretary of Agriculture for inspection of said animals and their products. Section 15. Such rejected or condemned animals shall at once be removed by the owners from the pens containing animals which have been inspected and found to be free from disease and fit for human food, and shall be disposed of in accordance with the laws, ordinance, and regulations of the state and municipalities in which said rejected or condemned animals are located. Section 25. A microscopic examination for trisomy shall be made of all swine products exported to countries requiring such examination. No microscopic examination will be made of hogs slaughtered for interstate trade, but this examination shall be confined to those intended for export of trade. So basically what they're saying is any of the cattle that are rejected, it's up to the municipality, meaning it's up to the city of Chicago to decide whether or not they can use it. And of course, the people of Chicago, because they're corrupt, they're going to say, yeah, go ahead and use it. You got more profit. And shortly afterward, one of these, a physician, made this discovery that the carcasses of steers, which had been condemned as tubercular by the government inspectors, and which therefore contained tomaines, which are deadly poisons, were left upon open platform and carted away to be sold in the city. So he insisted that these carcasses be treated with an injection of kerosene, and was ordered to resign the same week. So indignant were the packers that they went farther and compelled the mayor to abolish the whole Bureau of Inspection, so that since there had not been a pretense of any interference with the graft, there was said to be $2,000 a week hush money from the tubercular steers alone, and as much again from the hogs which had died of cholera on the trains, and which you might see any day being loaded into boxcars and hauled away to a place called Globe in Indiana, where they made fancy grades of lard. So everybody's getting a kickback, and money is pushing the business, and it's pushing the business in legal ways. It's pushing the business in illegal ways. Jurgis heard of these things little by little in the gossip of those who were obliged to perpetrate them. It seemed as if every time you met a person from a new department, you heard of new swindles and new crimes. There was, for instance, a Lithuanian who was a cattle butcher for the plant where Marija had worked, which killed meat for canning only. And to hear this man describe the animal which came to this place would have been worthwhile for Dante or Azola. It seemed that they must have agencies all over the country to hunt out old and crippled and diseased cattle to be canned. There were cattle which had been fed on whiskey malt, the refuse of the breweries, and had become what men called steerly, which means covered with boils. It was a nasty job killing these, for when you plunged your knife into them, they would burst and splash foul-smelling stuff into your face. When a man's sleeves were smeared with blood and his hands steeped in it, how how was he ever to wipe his face or to clean his eyes so that he could see? It was stuff such as this that made the embalmed beef that had killed several times as many United States soldiers as the bullets of the Spaniards. Only the army beef, besides, was not fresh canned. It was old stuff that had been lying in cellar for years. Ugh. Then one Sunday evening, Stella's back. Oh, there she is. You see her? What's the matter? What's the matter? Then one Sunday evening, Jorga sat puffing his pipe by the kitchen stove and talking with an old fellow whom Jonas had introduced and who worked in the canning rooms of Durham's. So Jurgis learned a few things about the great and only Durham canned goods, which had become a national institution. They were regular alchemists at Durham's. They advertised a mushroom ketchup, and the men who made it did not know what the mushroom looked like. They advertised potted chicken, and it was like the boarding house soup of the comic papers, through which a chicken had walked with rubbers on, which is like galoshes, these things over their feet. Perhaps they had a secret process for making chickens chemically. Who knows? Said Jorgis's friend. The things that went on into the mixture were tripe. And the fat of pork, the beef suet, the hearts of beef, and finally the wastes of the veal, when they had any, they put these into several grades and sold them at several prices. But the contents of these cans all came out the same hopper. And then there was the potted game and potted grouse, potted ham, deviled ham, deviled, as the men called it. Ham was made out of the waste ends of smoked beef that were too small to be sliced by the machines, and also tripe dyed with chemicals so that it would not show white, and trimmings of ham and corned beef and potato skins and all. And finally, the hard cartilaginous gullets of beef. After the tongues had been cut out, all this ingenious mixture was ground up and flavored with spices to make it taste like something. Anybody who could invent a new imitation had been sure of a fortune from old Durham, said Jorgis's informant. But it was hard to think of anything new in a place where so many sharp wits had been at work for so long. When men welcomed tuberculosis in the cattle they were feeding because it made them fatten more quickly, and where they brought up all the old rancid butter left over from the grocery stores of the continent and oxidized it by a forced air process to take away the odor, rechurned it with skim milk, and sold it in bricks to the cities. Up to a year or two ago, it had been the custom to kill horses in the yards, ostensibly for fertilizer. But after long agitation, the newspapers had been able to make the public realize that the horses were being canned. Whoa, yeah. Now it was against the law to kill horses in Packingtown. The law was really compiled with, for the present at any rate. Any day, however, one might see sharp-horned or shaggy-haired creatures running with the sheep, and yet what a job it would do to get the public to believe that a good part of what it buys for lamb and mutton was really goat's flesh. So pretty much any kind of meat, they're chopping up and they're throwing it in and they're saying it's canned meat and throwing spices in it to make it taste good. Yum. There was another interesting set of statistics that a person might have gathered in Packingtown. Those are the various afflictions of the workers. When Jorgis had first inspected the packing plants of Svedvelas, he had marveled while he listened to the tale of all the things that were made out of the carcasses of animals and of the lesser industries that were maintained there. Now he found that each one of these lesser industries was a separate little inferno, in its way as horrible as the killing beds, the source and fountain of them all. The workers in each of them had their own peculiar diseases, and the wandering visitor might be skeptical about all the swindles, but he could not be skeptical about these, for the worker bore the evidence of them about his own person. Generally, he had only to hold out his hand. There were the men in the pickle rooms, for instance, where old Antinos had gotten his death. Scarce at one of these that had not some spot of horror on his person. Let a man so much as scrape his finger pushing a truck in the pickle rooms, he might have a sore that would put him out of the world. All the joints in his fingers would be eaten by the acid one by one. Of the butchers and floorsmen, the beef boners and trimmers, all of those who use knives, you could scarcely find a person who had the use of his thumb. Time after time at the base had been slashed, till it was a mere lump of flesh against which the man pressed the knife to hold it. The hands of these men would be crisscrossed with cuts, until you could no longer pretend to count them or to trace them. They would have no nails. They would be worn off from pulling hides. Their knuckles were swollen so that their fingers spread out like a fan. There were men who worked in the cooking rooms in the midst of steam and sickening odors by artificial light. In these rooms, the germs of tuberculosis might live for 2 years, but the supply was renewed every hour. There were beef luggers who carried 200-pound quarters into the refrigerator cars, a fearful kind of work that began at 4 o'clock in the morning and that wore out the most powerful man in a few years. There were those who worked in the chilling rooms and whose special disease was rheumatism. The time limit that a man could work in a chilling room was said to have been 5 years. There would be the wool pluckers, whose hands went to piece even sooner than the hands of the pickle men, for the pelts of the sheep had been painted with acid to loosen the wool. Then the pluckers had to pull out this wool with their bare hands till the acid had eaten their fingers off. There were those who made the tins for the canned meat, and their hands too were a maze of cuts, and each cut represented a chance for blood poisoning. Some worked on the stamping machines, and there was very seldom one that you could not work long there at any one place was set, and not give out to forget himself to have part of his hand chopped off. There were the hoisters, as they were called, whose task it was to press the lever which lifted the dead cattle off the floor. They ran along the rafters, peering down through the damp and the steam. And as old Durham's architects had not built the killing rooms for the convenience of the hoisters, at every few feet they would have to stomp under a beam, say 4 feet above one that they ran on, which got them into the habit of stooping, so that a few years they would be walking like chimpanzees. Worst of any, however, were the fertilizer men and those who served in the cooking rooms. These people could not be shown to the visitor, for the odor of the fertilizer man would scare off any ordinary visitor at 100 yards. And as for the other men who worked in the tank rooms full of steam, and in some of which there were open vats near the level of the floor, their peculiar trouble was that they fell into the vats, and when they were fished out, there was never enough of them left to be worth exhibiting. Sometimes they would be overlooked for days, till all but the bones of them had gone out to the world as Durham's pure leaf lard. Yikes. So sometimes the men would fall into these vats and they wouldn't even know that they had fallen into the vats, and they'd be left there. And when they found them, it was just bones. All right, that's another chapter down, guys. That's another chapter down tonight. That's really good. So today, again, like I said, was kind of an interesting day in regards to the news. And one of the things, so I'm sure you guys have heard by now that the governor has put us on pause for another 2 weeks. So the earliest we would go back to school is now May 16th. But I'm bringing up my calendar. Hold on. Because I think May 16th is actually, it's a Saturday. So that would mean that the first actual day that we would come back would be May 18th. So we'll see. We'll see what happens. And that would only, darn it, I closed the calendar. And that would, let me go back to May 18th. So that would give us 1, 2, 3. So that would give us like 3. Actually, that would give us 4 full weeks of school left if we went back after that. So 15th, so the 18th we go back, and it wouldn't even be 4 full weeks because we have that Memorial Day break, which we wouldn't get that big 6-day weekend. They wouldn't do that anymore. We would probably just get Memorial Day off. We would just get that Monday off. But so we're looking at that, less than a full week or a full month of school if we go back. So let's see. We'll see how it progresses. But what I saw, the governor talk about today is that, first of all, hospitalization rate went down a little. Total hospitalizations went down a little. ICU admissions went down a little. However, there were still over 2,000 new cases in the state. And one of the things that he talked about today is, the thing that really kind of worries me, like now they know down in New Rochelle, and I think we've talked about this a couple times, but one person gave hundreds of people COVID-19 in one meeting. So, this is not like somebody comes into class with the flu and the 2 people next to them get it. This is the entire class gets it. So, so people keep comparing this to the flu, but you can't, right? You just can't. You can't compare it to the influenza. It spreads a lot faster, and it's definitely a lot more, lethal than the flu. And what he wants is, he says that once we hit this benchmark of infection rate, once we get it down to this level, then he's going to slowly start to reopen things. So he said the infection rate now is at this 0.9 rate. And what he wants to see it go down to is 0.3, because other cities that have reopened, that's where they got their infection rate to. And it seems like they're doing okay. And these are not cities in America. These are cities around the world in other countries. So what he also said is that at this point in time, we need to find a way to test everybody. We've got to test all New Yorkers. We've got to get them into their doctor or setting up testing sites or doing something and get everybody tested to really figure out this disease. And he says that at this rate, we're looking at 12 to 18 months before we have a vaccine, which, I don't know. I don't know if that's true or not. It seems as though there are some treatments that are very close to being able to really ensure that people that get it, if they get this treatment, that they're gonna have a good chance of making it through. But that doesn't mean that we have the ability to really vaccinate ourselves against it to keep it from coming back. So apparently 500,000 New Yorkers have been tested so far, which, hey, that's a lot of people, right? That's a lot of people. But to put it into perspective, guys, there are 19 million New Yorkers, right? And we've already said that we're not going to really start to open things up again until we feel that the other states around us are in a good place. And right now, Massachusetts has joined that consortium of states that we're talking with and we're planning with, and things are not going so well in Massachusetts. And I think it was Miss D told me today that Boston University has already canceled classes for the fall. So Massachusetts and Boston in particular is behind us in regards to the peak and all that kind of stuff. But it looks like BU, Boston University, it's a big college. They have closed for regular learning for the fall. So I'm assuming they're going to do some kind of distance learning. So, we got a way to go. I've got some stuff, and I hope I don't lose you here, but I've got some stuff that I want to read for you guys. So today, despite social distancing warnings, there were protests down at the Capitol in Albany. And I want to make sure I'm just switching over another tab because I want to read to you guys a couple of the quotes that came from people today. So today was the first time, and there was 606 new deaths today in New York State. And the first time we've actually seen protesters, and it didn't actually say how many protesters were down there. Didn't look like there were many, but here are some of the things that have been said by the protesters. So again, the governor has now put us on New York pause until May 15th. And that's the other thing. I think starting tomorrow, you've got to have a mask out in public. Non-essential workers are staying home. And if you work, your employer has to provide you with a mask. And in this this protest, some of the people that were interviewed said this, right? The majority of people I know want to work, and this is a guy, Mike Gee, Gee. The majority of people I know want to work and make an honest living, and they don't want to live off the government. I do think we've been duped a little bit. While I acknowledge people have died, I went around to the hospitals in New York City, videos that went viral. They weren't overwhelmed, G said. And the governor has responded to that by saying, we need to keep doing what we want to do, or what we've been doing. And he says, if you think, this is the governor, if you think 600 people died yesterday, if you don't think 600 people died yesterday, and if you don't think that's a problem, I disagree with you. If you don't think 600 people die, I'll bring you to see those 600 people. I don't know. I guess when I look at this, I kind of say, how did this guy, and I'm not saying he's wrong. I'm not saying that, he's lying, but how did he get into the hospitals, and how did he go and look around and see that ICUs weren't overwhelmed? You can't do that, right? You can't get into an ICU. Excuse me. He might be able to get into, just a waiting room of an emergency room or something like that. But to be able to say that the hospitals in general weren't overwhelmed, I'm not sure. But people are now, and again, we've talked about this a couple times. When do we pull the trigger? When do we get things rolling? It's not gonna be an easy decision, but this thing, there's no doubt about it, guys. This is lethal, right? This is lethal. So and this is kind of hot off the presses here. So President Trump said that late this afternoon that as of May 1st, he is not going to require any kind of social distancing from the federal government. So he's saying after May 1st, it's basically up to the states. We're going to leave it in their hands to make the decisions. However, The other thing that is going on with, and I'm interested to know again, always what you guys think. Should it be our governor that's making these decisions, or should it be the president? We started all of this with me giving you a video to watch and interview to watch and to talk about that. Who is the person that should be making the shots here or calling the shots? But President Trump has also done something, and he's talked about it yesterday and today. So the president, right in the Constitution, the first article of the Constitution outlines what at the time we wanted to be the most important part, or at least it was the thing that we fought the most for, right? Representation. So Article 1 of the Constitution lays out representation, how Congress is going to work. Article 2 lays out how the executive branch, how the office of the president is going to work. And in Article 2, there is this little rule. And what this rule says is that the president can basically tell Congress to go on vacation. Hey, Congress. Hey, Senate. Hey, House of Representatives. I'm going to close you down. I'm going to shut you down. And then Congress would be in recess. So what has happened over our history is that, number one, Congress does this anyways. Congress goes on recess from every once in a while, and there are presidents that make what are called recess appointments. So meaning that they will appoint people to the government that need to be approved by the House or the Senate to be able to take their jobs. And when you recess appoint someone, you kind of skip that process. So President Trump is saying, hey, there are some judges that I want to appoint, not Supreme Court judges, but federal judges, district judges. There are some other people that I want to appoint, and I don't think that they're going to be approved at the moment. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to use this rule that no other president, even though it's in Article 2 of the Constitution, no other president has ever used this before. And now he's threatening and saying, I'm going to use it. But we'll see. I don't know. I think shutting down Congress right now during this, international pandemic might not be the best idea. But we'll see what comes of it. So here's the other thing. So this $2.2 trillion stimulus plan has different parts to it. And one part is basically business loans to small businesses. There's business loans to big businesses. There's just some general pork, which is, things that got added to the bill to get people to vote for it, right? So there were people that were like, yeah, I'm not voting for this thing. And then, the people that created the bill said, hey, Senator, Sidney from Utah, why don't we go ahead and put $20 million in this for health clinics in Utah? Nope. Well, what if we put $50 million for health clinics in Utah? Nope. How about $100 million for health clinics in Utah? Yep, you got my vote. I'll vote for it. So that's called pork barreling, or adding the fat to a bill. And so, not only are there these stimulus things, but there are all this pork that's been added to it to help get it passed. And one of the programs is called PPP, the Payroll Protection Plan. So small businesses can go to a bank and say, I need a loan to pay my employees for 8 weeks. Okay. Here is my payroll. Here it is. This is how much I spend $15,000 a week on payroll. Quick math. What's that? $120,000, right? So the bank goes, okay. Here you go. Here's $120,000. This will help you pay your employees for 8 weeks. And as long as you can prove to us that you needed the money, you only have to pay back the interest on the loan. So it becomes a grant. But if you can't prove that it was absolutely necessary, then you have to pay back up to 75% of the loan, which is still not a bad thing. I mean, both is good if it keeps your business going. But, I guess it's kind of like if the owners of Golub are sitting on $300 million and they borrow a ton of money to pay their employees for 8 weeks. And then the government goes, wait a minute, you got a couple $100 million in the bank. You didn't need this. You got to pay us back 75% of what you borrowed. But anyways, so that money is already gone. All the money in that stimulus bill that was set aside to help small businesses borrow money to pay their employees for 8 weeks, it's tapped out, it's gone. So the library in Middleburg, I'm on the board out here, and today I started the process of investigating and trying to see if we at the library could apply, which we could. However, as I was kicking emails back and forth with New York State library officials, asking questions, I found out some more information, which ultimately I don't think it would have been a good idea for us to do it, because we would have landed in that kind of like, we didn't really need it. So we would have had to have paid back 75%, but it was still worthwhile to investigate it. But anyways, as I'm sending around these emails and doing all this investigation, I get a news alert. PPP has run out. So we're in today's April 16th. So we're in 11 days in, and the money's already gone for that program. So the SBA, the small business loans, there are still ways for small businesses to borrow money and to be able to use that money for like a wide variety of things. That's still out there. But one of the other things that I found out today was that you, in a lot of circumstances, are required to use your bank or go through your bank for these loans, which out here in Middleburg, we have 3 banks. Wait a minute, 2 banks. And they're both chain banks. It's not like the Bank of Middleburg with a guy with a double barrel shotgun, guarding the gold